Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone, and welcome to my channel. Today we have a 2014 Ram Eco Diesel with a leaking water pump. Kind of exciting. I started my channel with an Eco Diesel video. I was doing head gaskets on one 2.5 years ago, and there was not one video on YouTube about head gaskets on an Eco Diesel, timing, anything. So that's why I started my channel, to help people out, because that's how I learned how to work on diesels. So funny thing is, 2.5 years later, these things are more populated now, and there really aren't any good water pump videos. So stay tuned for a great water pump video, and join me as I show you how to make this repair successful. Got a leaking water pump on this Eco Diesel. We're gonna get started. First few steps gonna be to remove this engine cover, remove this bottle, mark your hoses so you know exactly where they go. Put a paint marker across here. That way when you put it back together, you line it up, line goes straight, hose is not going to leak, and drain the coolant. The other thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go ahead and recover the refrigerant. Now, the Eco Diesels that I've worked on were all newer, and they had 1234YF, which requires a different machine, and it takes a long time. So you're going to go ahead and suck that down, because you see all these lines right here. They're right in front of the water pump. We got to get all this moved because the water pump is down there. A little easier to see the water pump right now. The water pump pulley is right down there. Looks like this. So here's your coolant temp sensor. So this is where your thermostat housing sits. It actually sits like that. So this housing right here bolts to the top. So this hose right here, we're going to disconnect that. That connects to the water pump right there. You're also going to have a flange here that's going to bolt up. Coolant temp. So here we're going to go ahead and get this hose off. Actually, we could actually just unbolt this thermostat housing and leave this hose connected. And I'm going to disconnect it here just to get it out of the way. Disconnect this hose, and we're going to take the charge air pipe out right here and down there. It's a worm drive clamp down here and clips here to release it. You have to lift it up on both sides, and then you have to get this center lifted up through this hole. These are a little tricky to get off, but I'm going to get this out of the way. We'll be able to access what we got to do. From here, once you've got this off, we're going to take off the lower radiator hose right here. This vacuum line right here, it tees in and it comes around over here. We're just going to disconnect it here because you don't want to break it. So you're just going to depress the two little tabs. It's going to come out, and there's going to be a bunch of clips that hold it to the AC lines. Next thing we're going to do is come down here to the compressor and disconnect the two different AC lines that come down, so we can move them out of the way. And you're going to have to unclip them from this bracket, and then we're going to work on this vacuum pump, because we got to get all this out of the way. Now this high pressure fuel line right here, we're going to have to remove this. This is a one-time use fuel line. What it does is the high pressure pump is right here. It runs off of the cam here, and it produces high pressure fuel. It pushes it down the line, up this line here. It's a supply tube over here, and it feeds this fuel rail. So also we're going to have to go ahead and disconnect this clamp right here, because we have to be able to lift this up, and we're going to be disconnecting this clamp right here, this hose, because we have to get this hose out of the way because it sits on top of the high pressure fuel line. This vacuum line right here, you got these two tabs. They're going to be sitting right there, and they're going to be hooked on there. What you have to do is you have to pull them back or forward, both sides, and push them down. So I'm not going to release it but basically when you push it up, it locks onto that tab right there. And so once you've done that, it's going to just slide off. And once you get it on, you're going to push the red tab back up. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this electrical connector right here and unbolt this vacuum pump. And there's a bracket here we got to get to. AC lines are out of the way. All I did was just pull them over and wrap them up around the hood. All the hoses are disconnected here. We're going to get this bracket off here. This is the line, the other charge air hose is off here. Going to go ahead and take this off. Don't forget to put this back on. I have done it on Sprinters and some other ones. So you want to be really careful, because it goes all inside the fuel lines in here. and it's like stuck on an injector connector right now, and you don't want to break anything in there because it'll be quite costly. So put a rag on here, cover this up so no garbage gets in here. You don't want it to go into your intercooler or in your turbo in your engine. Want to stick a rag down there over your AC line connections. It's Friday, getting ready to go home, so just trying to make sure I got everything covered up. Just tuck the lower hose down there, and as you can see, we have plenty of room. The reason that we have to take this off is because we have to get to that fuel line right there. So we got to get that one off, and we got to take this cover off because we got to get to the other fuel line that's on this high pressure pump. Here's that cover, just 4 bolts. You're gonna have a foam insulator inside of here that's gonna want to stay on the pump. That's got to come off. As you can see, here's the fuel line we got to get to right there. So this is your high pressure pump. So you got your supply for the driver's side here, your supply for the passenger side here. Then you need to disconnect these 2 fuel lines right here. There's just a tab on each side. You push the tabs in and the lines pull off, and then we have access. So we got to get this bracket off right here. This bracket's got a couple bolts underneath, but over here, this charge air pipe down here, we disconnected the upper part. We got to go ahead and take that nut off right there so we can pull this whole bracket for this charge air pipe forward, so we can get to the nut behind it, so we can move this bracket. And then we got to take this lower cover off right here. There's 5 bolts and nuts, I believe, that pull this cover comes off, and then it exposes the belt and the tensioner. Actually, the tensioner is right there, but you can't get to it until you take the cover off. So once you get the bracket off, you can move this out of the way, pull the bracket off, and you got the 5 nuts and bolts on this thing. Pull this out. That's what it looks like right there. Now we can go ahead and get to the belt. Go ahead and take the belt off. Next up, we got to get this little plastic bypass out of the way. You got 2 8mm bolts, and you want to try to grab this side and kind of twist it a little bit to break the O-ring free, and then it pulls out. Just be careful because this is plastic. Looks like that. It's going to have an O-ring there, O-ring there. I'm pretty sure this is what was leaking, but I'm not sure. You can see coolant leaking from the water pump. So next up, we got to get this tensioner out of the way. So you're going to have 2 bolts. It's like 2 13s. Going to pull out, and then we got to get to this line right here. And this line goes over to there. We're going to disconnect it from here and here, and we're going to try to just roll it out of the way to get the water pump out. We don't necessarily want to take it out because then we have to take all this stuff off. We'll go ahead and take this 110 out, and we should be able to lift this union up and enough to move the pipe around to get some access. We're gonna have to take this little adapter plate off. This is the adapter for the tensioner. I thought I had this bolt out enough. Let's see. It comes out like this. You're gonna have, hang on. It's all covered in grease. Trying to do this one-handed. Thought I had the bolts all loose. Okay, so it comes out like that. We got 2 13s and an 8. And now we can access the whole water pump. You're going to have some oil leaking out because that's the timing cover. 2 of these are the timing cover bolts. That lower one is the lower timing cover bolt, and the upper one is the upper timing cover bolt. Because right there is the seam for the upper timing cover where it meets the lower. So just watch out for that oil there. We'll have to clean all that out before we put it back together. 19mm for the nut on both sides. So once you get this, you can see that it still doesn't move. So we took this 10 out here. Well, what you can see right there is there's a studded bolt right there that this goes onto. We have to loosen that up so we can rotate this. We can possibly, now because we're replacing it, so we've got to actually take that stud out. You could probably just disconnect these fuel lines and give you a little more access. Or we could just take that nut off right there, and then the whole fuel line assembly will move. And these are plastic hoses, so be careful. Maybe we'll just disconnect these from the pump. Just take an air nozzle, blow all this off. We'll just disconnect it here, and we'll take that nut off right there, and we should be able to lift this and move it out of the way. Be really careful, it's connected right there. And right there, those are plastic lines, so you want to be very, very careful. Just disconnect these here, and now we have a ton of access to get that bolt out. And then we're gonna have to probably undo some clips to be able to snake that line out. There's stuff on top of it that's attached, so we'll have to get all that opened up to get this line out of here to replace it. You try to not replace it, but it's kind of foolish. You got 1/8 right here and 1/8 right there. You can lift this up. This is a little stud that just sits in a threaded hole, and you can snake this out from under here like that. And then with all this moving, you can see we got the line out. There's the line we're replacing right there. I'll show you the part number on that in a minute. So here's the part number right here. Here's the sticker from Dodge. So this was readily available. So obviously there's still eco diesels out there. They're still making parts for them. So there we go. So here's a good idea for stuff that you're unfamiliar with. I got this bolster mat right here. This thing is it's made out of silicone. It's cleanable. It's due up to high heat. It can be cleaned. It withstands brake clean. These holes stretch out to, I think, like a 13 millimeter bolt, and then go back. So I got this laid out for the bolts. Now sometimes when you're unfamiliar with something, it's best to look at what you're taking off. So I got the water pump laid up right here. So you got to disconnect the coolant temp sensor, which is like this. It's upside down, and you got this yellow clip. You got to pop out, depress this. This little tang right here, even though I had it depressed, was hanging up, so I had to stick a hook under there to unlatch it. So now that I've got all that off, we've got full access to the water pump. And the one thing you'll notice is there is a flange on the back side. Well, guess what? You can't get back there. So it's got a little inlet housing that goes underneath there, and there are several O-rings. Looks like we already know that there's 2 O-rings there, an O-ring there. There's gonna be an O-ring on the pipe, but there's 2 more. So it goes underneath the intake. So let's get this unbolted. We'll see what it looks like. But you want to be real careful when you pull this water pump out, because it's attached to a hose assembly that's behind it. So you want to tap us. So here's what it looks like right here. All the bolts are the same. It's just a good practice to use something like this if you're not 100% certain. Sometimes there's brackets that go through bolts, intake manifolds, things like that. And you can use the bolts, and you put the bracket on the bolt, so you know that that bracket needs to go with the bolt and where it goes. Like I know a 3-liter Sprinter, when you take it apart, there's some brackets that go through the intake bolts. And if you don't put them on when you put the intake on, then you have to take it back apart because it goes underneath components. So here you want to smash this a few times with a dead blow hammer. I just have a Cobalt one, it's close to the house. Go ahead and get it warranted easily. And then you want to kind of wiggle. So I haven't taken this out yet. All I did was break it free, and I had to move my bucket because I was dumping coolant on the ground. So here's what it's going to look like. So this is what I was talking about, this pipe assembly. Luckily it is aluminum, so we don't have to worry about it breaking. So let's go ahead and get this off. We got to get all this cleaned up. Now you want to be really careful with these eco diesels, because there's coolant lines that run underneath this turbo. And the one that I did the head gaskets on, the reason I did it was because another shop had got one of these and did some repairs up top and didn't know there was a coolant leak in the valley, and therefore it ran low on coolant and it blew the head gasket. So you can see that we have a pipe right there. So you're gonna have to snake that O-ring off, clean that surface, and put a new one back. And then you're obviously gonna wanna clean up all that coolant. What I like to do is, when I have a situation like this where I just busted this thing apart, I'll stick rags under there and shove a screwdriver, push them all down in the coolant and the oil, let them sit while I'm cleaning everything up. And then a lot of times, by the time I'm ready to, to do a little more, pull the rags out and they've absorbed most of the coolant and the oil. Because taking an air nozzle and all that, you don't want to stick a evacuator back there, because this is going to get full of all that gunk. So let's get all this cleaned up. Here's a little picture from AllData, what it looks like. They show you the bolts here. They show you the water pump. They show you the pipe assembly from the back. And then they also show you this assembly right here, just showing you what's all entailed in this hose assembly. It's quite a bit. And then the O-ring. All right, let's look up the torque specs. I'm not going to show you me putting it back together. It's pretty much the same, so don't forget your O-ring. Make sure you clean that surface and then lube that O-ring real good. Let's see, you're going to get all your new O-rings on your water pump. Bolt number 4, the 2 bolts that bolt this up to the back of the pump. So those are going to be 8 foot-pounds. So that's those 2 that go to the back of the water pump right here. So those are going to be 8 foot-pounds. And then you're going to install your water pump to 24 foot-pounds. And your water pump will be installed. Don't forget your O-rings on your little bypass there. And that's going to be 71 inch-pounds. And let's look up the... So here it is. We're going to install the new left fuel tube, which is number 11 right there. The left would be if you're sitting in the driver's seat. I know it seems like it's the right, but when you're in the driver's seat, the left side of the engine is the driver's side. So that's how it works right there. If it's a transverse engine, it's like you're sitting on the transmission looking towards the engine, and that's how it determines left and right. But so pipe number 11. So we're going to install the fuel tube assembly, get your bolts all in, all right, get it all hand tight, finger tight. You're going to tighten the union nut to 44 inch-pounds. Number 10, the one at the fuel rail right there. You're going to tighten that one to 44 inch-pounds. And then you're going to tighten an additional 75 degrees. Then you're going to tighten the nut number 12, which is on the high pressure fuel pump right there. And you're going to do the same. You're going to tighten that one to 8 foot-pounds and then 75 degrees. And then that way your fuel line is on. Make sure you torque this. That's why you torque it, because it bites, and you don't want to reuse it because when it bites, it makes like a mark on the inside of the nut and the tube, not the nut, but the tube where it goes into the pump. And if you don't get it back exactly where it's supposed to be, it will leak. That's why you replace it. So one more time, gonna finger tight all the nut, both of the nuts, get all your bolts started, putting it in place. The one at the rail is going to be 44 inch-pounds and 75 degrees. The one at the pump is going to be 8 foot-pounds and 75 degrees. Make sure that you use an airlift to fill this cooling system. All right, so before you put your water pump in, you want to make sure that you lube up the pipe in the back that goes onto the O-ring that's in the valley. And this right here, this bracket here that goes through the timing cover, these 2 big 13mm bolts are going to be 33 foot-pounds, and the little 8's going to be 96 inch-pounds. And make sure you put some thread sealer on those bolts, because remember all the oil that came out of this hole right here. You want to make sure that you seal up those threads. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that this helped you get this job done, feel more comfortable with this, as when you first look at this thing, you can't even see the water pump. So it's pretty buried. There's some parts that require replacement and just some procedures that you need to follow. So thanks for watching. See you next time.